The multi-billion-dollar profitable industry that is the oil and gas industry right now has an unlimited ability to emit emissions into the atmosphere. We don't think any industry, particularly not one as wildly profitable as the oil and gas industry, should be able to have unlimited pollution. That's why we're putting a cap on emissions, not on production.
That's factually false. The industry's emissions have been regulated for decades, Mr. Speaker, and he just wants to shut down their production and give more of the money and jobs to Donald Trump and the United States of America. And then there's the electricity tax. He calls it a regulation, but now we know that it's a tax because the independent Ontario energy operator says that this new regulation tax will drive up costs for families by $175 a year and will drive factories, mines, and mills south of the border. Why is it killing jobs with high electricity prices? Liberal Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador is attacking his energy cap. The Liberal Premier says that this reduction of 35% in Newfoundland's energy production is already sending investment away. We understand that President Trump wants to take our money in jobs, but why is the Prime Minister standing against his own Liberal Premier in Newfoundland and Labrador to help Trump do it?
Across the country, except on the Conservative benches, Canadians know climate change is real. Canadians are also stepping up in lots of different ways to help reduce their emissions, to grow the economy, to create a better future for their kids and grandkids.
The Prime Minister says he's going to leave the economy to bankers. He says he doesn't think much about monetary policy, the budgets balance themselves, and that he's not very good with numbers, but he did get one thing right. He said that deficits cause inflation. So did his finance minister right before she introduced his budget, saying no deficit above $40 billion. So, straight up question. Will the Prime Minister keep his word and cap the inflationary deficit below $40 billion?
I know the Leader of the Opposition is eager for our fall economic statement. If he really wants to see it, he could perhaps stop the obstruction of Parliament to allow us to move forward on dealing with Canadians and challenges that they are facing. But it's interesting that he brought up inflation once again. He stopped talking about inflation after years of railing about it because we did the work to actually bring it down, Mr. Speaker. We invested in programs that were there to support Canadians, but that didn't contribute to inflation. Inflation is now back down in the target range. Interest rates are coming down. That's why we can give a tax break to Canadians.
What is not responsible is allowing 80% of the chemicals used in fentanyl manufacturing to come in unregulated and legally. What is not responsible is decriminalizing crack, heroin, and fentanyl, and then after you see that it leads to a massive increase in deaths, then 2 weeks ago, he, the Bloc, and the NDP all voted in favor of a committee report to decriminalize fentanyl right across the country at a time when Canadians are dying and our border could be closed. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he has reversed himself and now opposes decriminalization of fentanyl?
Once again, we see the priority of the Leader of the Opposition is to exploit and use Canadians who are suffering to score cheap political points. Meanwhile, we do the serious work amongst parliamentarians across different orders of government with partners around the world to address this in a way that is grounded in science, not ideology, that works with frontline workers, makes investments in wraparound services, and puts everything forward to try and save lives as best we possibly can. That's what Canadians deserve, not the kind of cheap partisanship that this Leader of the Opposition continues to demonstrate every time he stands up in this House. It is absolutely irresponsible.
And just this week, the OECD published a report showing that Toronto and Vancouver are now the two most expensive housing markets in all of North America. Vancouver's housing is significantly more expensive than Seattle, even though Vancouverites make half as much money. Toronto's housing is more expensive than New York, even though New Yorkers make 50% more. Will the Prime Minister call a housing tax election so that we can bring it home?
The Conservative leader has been having a rough few weeks since he promised he would be shutting down housing projects across the country. Even his Conservative MPs have been going around behind his back complaining to the CBC that they can no longer advocate for their communities, complain that they're no longer allowed to stand up for their mayors who need investments in housing in their communities. He prefers to muzzle his MPs than allow them to be their voice in their communities. His commitment to cut billions of dollars of investments from housing will not help anyone, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're delivering for Canadians.
We don't complain to the CBC, we complain about the CBC. But I digress. The Prime Minister says that if he gives more money to local bureaucracies, they'll speed up home building. So he gave $500 million to Toronto City Hall. What happened? Home building slowed down by 40%. He gave Vancouver City Hall $115 million, and housing construction slowed down 15%. Gave $176 million to Ottawa City Hall, construction down 22%. When will he learn that what we need in this country is to build homes, not bureaucracy?
Mayors across the country, including in Conservative-held ridings, are speaking out about the reckless cuts the Conservative leader is proposing to money that municipalities need to increase densification, to accelerate permitting, to move forward on home building faster and faster across this country. The Conservative leader is standing against what his own MPs are asking for when he's telling mayors across the country he's going to pull billions of dollars away of investments in housing that will respond to Canadians' needs to be able to grow the economy and live securely for the future.
Hiking taxes, debt, and inflation to pay off politicians in exchange for press releases and photo ops will not solve the problem. What it has done is doubled housing costs and made Toronto and Vancouver the most expensive housing markets in North America, worse than New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and many other places with more people and money. So here's a choice. He's afraid of a carbon tax election. Why don't we have a different kind? Why don't we have a housing tax election where he proposes to give money to politicians? I propose to put it in the pockets of home buyers. Yeah. Oh, and now they're complaining that Canadians might choose me if there were an election. That's not their choice. It's not my choice. It's not any of their choices. That's the decision of the Canadian people. So why doesn't he turn the decision over to the people who run this country, Canadians, in a carbon tax election?